93% of your life is spent indoors, but so many of our favorite moments are outdoors. The fresh air, the feeling of peace. Since warmer weather is almost here, let's make the most of it with Outer, the new outdoor furniture company with purposely designed furniture to get you outdoors more.
Outer makes the world's most beautiful, comfortable, innovative, and high-quality outdoor furniture, all from sustainable materials. I love the new outdoor dining table and chairs I just bought. It looks great in my backyard, and it's the perfect setup for hosting a dinner party. Go to liveouter.com/thefounderhour to see all the incredible products they have to offer.
For a limited time, get 10% off and free shipping. That's liveouter.com/thefounderhour. Terms and conditions apply. Hey everyone, before we get into the episode, just a quick reminder, if you enjoy what you hear, please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. That way you get notified when new episodes drop. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at The Founder Hour. Let's get into it. Welcome to a riveting episode of The Founder Hour, where we explore the captivating journey of Seamus Blackley, the ingenious mind behind the creation of Xbox. Seamus takes us on a compelling odyssey through his personal story and entrepreneurial ventures, from his fascination with physics to an impactful career in video games, including a stint working with Steven Spielberg at Dreamworks. Seamus shares the highs and lows that have defined his path. Join us as we delve into the setbacks and triumphs, learning about the failures that shaped him and the pivotal moments that led to convincing Bill Gates and Microsoft to venture into the fiercely competitive world of video game consoles, challenging Sony's dominance with the PlayStation. We explore the internal struggles Seamus faced during this groundbreaking endeavor and gain insight into the reasons behind his eventual departure from Microsoft. This is not only a conversation about the birth of Xbox, but also about the resilience, vision, and evolution of a true entrepreneurial spirit. Hope you enjoy. So is it Seamus?
It is Seamus. It's Gaelic for James.
Yeah.
So Sean is John.
Yep.
And Seamus is James.
But
Seamus.
your first name is what? Is it Seamus?
Well, so this is my new first name.
Okay.
I changed it in the 90s.
Okay.
Because the guys who I worked with decided that Jonathan, which is the name I was given, wasn't the right name for me.
Why is that?
I don't know. They said it doesn't suit you. And I was really kind of a madman then, which is not to say that I'm not now. And so they had a contest to see what my new name would be, and I showed up to the office on the following Monday, and everything had been changed to Seamus. And the misspellings and mispronunciations that would last for the rest of my life began that day.
Interesting. I mean, you look like a
starting
Seamus,
with me,
but you also look like a Jonathan. I
think that I think they did a good job.
Yeah,
I'm not complaining. I think it was a good job.
How long has it been your name? You said how many years?
Wow, probably since 1992.
Oh 31 years.
So it's your name.
So
like,
this
there's no
whole
other name.
power that you have, as we get to my birth date, I need you to turn it off.
Got it.
Okay.
Well,
Cool.
I know that day because we were both born in 1992. So that was the only power remaining.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't say that. Just make people wonder if you have
For
some
sure.
kind of like Rain Man like ability
just-
to. come
Just-
up
I know
with
how to
dates.
like multiply 16 times 17 like real quick.
Damn.
I don't know the answer. I think it's like 142 or
The
something.
Feynman like thing.
No, 1042. I don't know actually.
Richard Feynman.
Richard Feynman. Yeah. Do you know the story of Feynman and Hans Bethe?
No.
So in the Manhattan Project,
Yep.
Feynman was a junior guy. Didn't get his PhD yet, and Hans Bethe, famous German physicist who had come over, is working on the atomic bomb project. And Bethe's thing was he could very quickly do arithmetic. He could calculate very quickly, right? So when he was working with Feynman, which he often did because Feynman was wildly brilliant and was a really good guy to work with and bounce ideas off of, they get to something and Bethe would say, okay, well, so that's like the cube root of 3. And Feynman would like reach for the calculator. There are these big mechanical calculators called Marchant machines at the time, which looked like the old fashioned, like mechanical, like cash boxes that you find like in antique stores and stuff, or if you go like at, some vintage store somewhere. And Feynman reaches over to it and Bethe goes, it's about 1.7. And Feynman's like, I didn't even start to think about this yet. And Bethe goes, it's about 1.73 or 1.732 if you want. And Feynman's like, how the hell did he do that? And then he found himself really competitive with this. So they would start racing to calculate things. It's like, okay, you're multiplying this number by this number, and you notice that it's kind of like this number squared, but a little bit different. And so you can adjust it like this. And if you add them first, it goes like this. And then you get to the number. And eventually, after practicing for a couple of years, he could get there about half the time that Beta could.
Wow.
And they were both just super terrifying to watch because nobody else could even begin to understand how they could get there.
Yeah.
But it was like a hobby. It's like you notice things about numbers, like your birthday. And you happen to know that. And if that comes up quickly because you're thinking about it, then you can use that to know, okay, well, that's 2 years after my birthday. So then it's my age plus 2.
Correct.
It's more like, it's more like reasoning in a way, right? Like in your head, just quickly like associating things, numbers with things and reasoning that way as opposed to actually in your head doing like arithmetic.
Well, I like it as an analogy because it's an example of something that is typically considered to be really tedious, but you turn it into amusement.
Like a game. Yeah, it's like fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a little bit like Ned Flanders.
Yeah. Were you so going back to like your early days, were you interested in math or just certain subjects or anything like that? Or were you like a good student, I guess, in school?
I was a terrible student because I was not interested in anything that the school was showing me. And I was interested in everything that could help me do whatever project I had in mind at the time. And so, if I had to learn math to do something, if I had to learn how electric circuits work to do something, I would go learn it. And I really liked that. And I remember being very shocked in those rare times when the things we were learning at school was somehow relevant to something I was actually interested in.
But like, what were some?
I had a lot of
things?
report cards that said so much potential.
Yeah, he's not
SMP?
applying himself.
Yeah.
Where were you born?
I was born in New Mexico. I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, on a date I will not mention because you will compute the number of years. So we're not going there.
Don't tell me.
Yeah, you can't even
Post
estimate.
1776, so it was already established, obviously. So you're less than 250 something years old. So
New Mexico is actually the last state to become a state. So it would be post 1905 or maybe 1911. I can't remember which.
So
I'll leave it as an exercise.
So you're less
for the
than
listener.
120. You're still looking good.
Yeah, I'm looking good for that age.
What were some of those projects that you like to like tinker with or play around with?
We had a rocket sled where we're trying to break the sound barrier, all sorts of bombs, guided missiles, rocket motors, computers, lasers, a lot of computer games. We thought we invented the computer virus. We thought we invented email. Like all these, stuff like that.
Yeah, we were the reason John McAfee entered the market.
And why he went insane.
And why he went insane, exactly.
Yeah. Do you remember life in New Mexico at all?
Of course. How old do you think I am, man? Jesus.
You don't want me to know, so
okay.
I got to ask all these crazy questions.
Yes, I remember it. It was terrible. We had to walk everywhere, ride a donkey.
How old were you? How old were you?
Sometimes the pterodactyls would snatch you right out of your front yard.
I mean, look, it's pre my time. It looks like so,
sure.
Yeah. How many years were you guys there?
Well, my dad moved a lot. My family moved a lot because my dad got a succession of jobs. My father was an honest guy working in radiology at a time when a lot of radiology departments were crooked.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back on it, it's actually really interesting. I didn't get this when I was a kid, but back then, all radiology was film-based, like all photography. And so a large part of the cost of operating a radiology department was processing the film.
Right.
So radiology departments would always smell like photo labs. I remember this smell very distinctly when I was a kid. And what it meant was that they were developing these huge pieces of film. I mean, you know how big x-rays used to be, if you remember back when they were like big black pieces of plastic. So there's a terrific amount of reclaimed silver from developing that film because it's silver halide. And so a lot of these radiology departments were actually just keeping the silver from the hospital and cashing in on it. And my father actually wouldn't go in on those schemes and eventually made a stand after we lived in like Phoenix and Wyoming and Arizona, came back to New Mexico and finally was sort of sick of moving and made a stand and actually had the chairman of the department fired and became the chairman of the department. So for my high school years, he was the boss in the radiology department.
Awesome. And did you have any aspirations to kind of go down that kind of path, or you were just like,
anyone whose family contains a physician would never consider a career in medicine. Just looking at it. And so I don't know how theoretical physics became a thing, because as far as I can tell, it's even less sleep, but no dying patients. So that's good. Except your own ego.
Did you have an idea, like when you were young, of what you wanted to do, like, or be when you grew up, or?
Yeah, I wanted to be a jazz musician.
Okay. How young were you when you decided that?
When I was probably in middle school.
Okay.
Yeah.
You played instruments?
I did. I played the trombone and the piano, and I really connected with jazz, like Oscar Peterson, Billy Childs, these guys.
Yep.
We could have a podcast about.
Is that the Oscar
jazz
Peterson
piano.
trio?
No, that's Oscar Peterson, the guy.
The guy.
You know,
okay.
he had many trios.
Yeah.
Saying.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's the famous trio, and there's a great YouTuber who I like a lot, who has a show about music.
Is it Rick Beato?
Rick Beato, yeah.
Love that guy.
Yeah. And I've actually talked to Rick Beato.
Okay.
He was like, hey, we should chat. And I sent him my phone number and he called me. And it was awesome because, usually when I talk back to Rick Beato, he doesn't answer, but he did. He had a show about the greatest solo of all time. It was Oscar Peterson.
Right.
And you should watch that episode of Behind the Music or is it Behind the Music? What's it called? Can't remember. And it's the Rick Beato YouTube channel about the Oscar Peterson solo, the greatest solo of all time, or something similar to that. Because he shows, he watches a video of this solo and then analyzes it. And the best part about it is that the two guys playing with Oscar Peterson are also like phenomenal genius titans of jazz.
Yeah.
And there's a point while he's playing when they both look down at him, it's like a drummer and a bass player, and they're like, holy shit. And so it's a great moment of like geniuses being blown away by a super genius.
Wow. It's like the Spider-Man meme of everyone just pointing at each other.
Exactly.
Yeah. How far did you go with music? Like, did you go all the way with like?
I went all the way almost to my doom with music. And then I realized that all of the guys I respected most, I was going out and seeing, and I was playing piano in bars, like underage and stuff. And I had built a recording studio in the basement of a house, and we were, recording promos and ads and band demos and stuff. And I realized that the guys I respected most, these 40-year-old guys who were like just really great players, were like still living with their moms that didn't have a car.
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit.
Yeah. The lifestyle.
I don't know if I can do that.
Relative to the level of talent and just.
Well, the amount of work. I mean, this is the thing that most people don't understand is that, to play like that, even people who are really talented are just, that's all you do.
Yeah.
That's all you do. There's a great quote from Arthur Rubinstein, who said that if I don't practice for 1 day, I notice. If I don't practice for 2 days, my wife notices. If I don't practice for 3 days, the audience notices.
Mm.
Yeah. Very similar to an athlete, I would say, even very similar to business, to anything you're really doing.
It's really like anything. And so, interestingly, when I thought I escaped that, I mean, I'm a moron.
Right.
I'll escape like jazz piano.
Right.
Which is this super rarefied, ultra difficult thing you have to work super hard at for no reward.
Right.
To essentially the same exact thing called theoretical physics. A super hard thing that's ultra rarefied that you have to work super hard at that you get no reward for.
How did I mean,
amazing. Like, well done.
How did you decide that was going to be sort of your path?
It was the same. It felt the same in my head, and I could do them both.
So when you were exposed to theoretical physics, was it like in high school or when you were deciding what to study?
When I took physics classes in high school and as an undergraduate, it was no trouble at all to blow through them without doing any work.
Yeah.
I'm not a physics guy, and I'm sure some of our listeners, if not most, are not either. Can you
come on, man. Come on.
I mean, I know it's surprising.
You might be, you just don't know it.
That's true. That's very true. Not enough exposure. But can you explain what it is?
And awful teachers, dude, because,
we could. That's a whole other podcast show.
Well, it's true, but there's so many things, and math and physics are a great example. But there are a lot of subjects where, when you're in high school, when you're in junior high school, you don't remember any of the material you're being taught.
Not at all.
I mean, certainly I didn't because I wasn't fucking paying attention. But you don't remember any material taught, but you remember the attitude of the teacher. And if the teacher's scared or makes it seem weird, you just remember that.
Right.
Mm.
And it feeds back on itself because those teachers were taught by other teachers who were probably afraid.
Right.
And so you get this whole system where people are just freaked out by math and science.
Yeah.
And then it feeds back into media, you know, and recently I got a call from NPR who's doing a holiday, I think it's Freakonomics show about Richard Feynman. And I restored Richard Feynman's van and did a bunch of stuff with Feynman. And it turns out, you know, my wife was roommates with his daughter at Art Center, all this crazy stuff. And I mean, because being a physicist is like being in the mob. Like you never get out. You just never get out. Okay, they always pull you back in.
Yeah.
So, I actually told them I wasn't interested at first because I'm sick of media who want to talk about famous scientists, but they don't actually want to talk about the science because they assume, because they're scared of seeming ignorant or understanding it, that the audience is also scared. And so you have this phenomenon. And if you look at The Imitation Game, which is a movie about
Great movie.
Yeah.
Turing.
About Alan Turing, or if you look at the movie about Hawking, those movies make me crazy because what the filmmakers decided to do was, well, we can't tell the story of why these people were actually famous. So we have to tell another story, like, oh, that he's gay story.
Right. Like a traumatized version.
Oh, he's got a disease story. And it was weird. The movies felt very disconnected because it was like, why is everyone paying all this attention to Stephen Hawking? They never tell you why. And it's weird because filmmakers, authors, you know, other kinds of storytellers will spend a huge amount of time, like you guys do, for instance, on very intricate stories about business. And you'll take the time to explain to the audience the background, how the business works, why it's important, or a legal issue. And you make an interesting story out of that because that's the meat of the issue, right? But for some reason, and I think that it's because of this cultural bias, that same care isn't taken with math or physics.
Right.
And it's no different. Human beings
Why do you think that
it.
is, though?
It's just the fear. It's not
It's
hard.
The fear of what?
The fear of fear. It's
not
it's,
fully grasping or understanding the concept.
It's that you're taught to fear it. I remember going on a university tour when my sons were applying to university, to Bristol University in the UK. We're touring around, and the tour guide takes us past, you know, sociology department, housing, these different things. We get to the math building, and she says, oh, it's a math building, but, you know, none of us understand that. And all the parents are like, ha, ha, ha. I was like, fuck you.
Yeah.
Wow. Like, what culture are we in where that's okay? Like, if it was China or India, they'd be beating her up for saying that because they want their children to be hardcore on that stuff. And so how have we got culturally to the point where that's the case, whilst simultaneously we worship these tech gods who ostensibly have their empires built on science and math? And it's extremely odd. And so the only explanation I have is cultural.
Yeah.
And so these filmmakers and documentary makers, podcast guys, are scared of the fact that it's culturally normative to decide not to talk about that and to skirt around the edge. And you miss everything that's interesting. So I told the NPR guys that I wasn't interested in talking to them about Feynman unless they were going to talk about the thing that Feynman himself would have felt was most important about his life, because they started, you know, they want to see the van and talk about his crazy stories.
Right.
And I said, well, you can do that, but I don't want to help you unless you're going to talk about what was really important, which is that Richard Feynman was a guy who, like Oscar Peterson, even the smartest people who were best would look at the work that he had done and have no fucking idea how it came to him.
Yep.
It was like angels are whispering in his ear. He was an actual genius. It's a marvel of the human race. Talk about that, and I'll help you all you want.
For those who want to maybe start learning about Richard Feynman, where's the best place to start? I bought a book, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman.
That's a book that he wrote with Ralph Layton.
Yeah.
It was a big deal for guys like me at that age and a generation or two before, which was that here is this scientist, and it's a little bit different. This has changed over generations, but in the 1960s, scientists were very serious and they're very well respected and pillars of the community. And in the 70s, like they were like the devil, and then the 80s, they were nerds. So all of these are negative. And
Yeah.
so if you're a science person, you're considered not to be a human being.
Mhm.
Okay. It's like any human racism or bias. And I try to explain to people that if I had a computer disk in my notebook in like 1983 in high school, I had a tooth knocked out because the jocks were the cool ones, not the nerds. That's how it is now.
Right.
Back then, you get the shit kicked out of you.
Yep.
And it's impossible for people to understand today. But the decade before that, scientists were the devil, and the decade before that, they were gods. But in all cases, they weren't human beings. And even now, you characterize people who are tech entrepreneurs as being this like super race or something. And we, talk to the Y Combinator guys or Sam Altman, and it's like, it's hilarious because I know these guys and they're not gods.
Yeah.
And, they're not even Richard Feynman.
Right.
And, they're certainly not John von Neumann. So, when Feynman, came out with that book, which was really, Ralph Layton's work, who was the son of the chairman of the physics department at Caltech, who became friends with Feynman and heard Feynman's stories over the years and said, we should record these and then we should write a book about them. And so he sort of took it upon himself to do this. And it became wildly successful because not necessarily so much, I don't think, in my view, because the stories are hilarious or interesting or crazy, and they are, but more because here is a Nobel laureate who was like a regular guy.
Right.
He talks like a truck driver. He doesn't use fancy language. And the mark of real genius, you could be an 8-year-old child and ask Richard Feynman about quantum chromodynamics or probably not quantum, excuse me. Sorry, nerds. You could ask him about quantum electrodynamics, and he could explain enough that you could get it in simple terms and not bullshit you, not change it to be wrong to sound good.
Yeah.
And that's somebody who really understands something. To make something simple, you have to really, really understand it. And a lot of people who study hard enough to be that good are insecure about seeming smart. And so they won't simplify it because it feels like cheapening the brand, right? It feels like you're selling yourself out. Feynman didn't care. And these were extraordinary things. And it was a first for people to hear somebody of that scientific stature to talk like that.
Right.
And so it was a big deal. And it gave permission to whole generations of people to feel okay about becoming a scientist, to feel okay about being a human, to have human foibles, to like want to go have sex and still be a scientist. Now, Feynman was also like a horrible womanizer and did a lot of shit that's not so cool. And you have to, hold that in equal measure. But he also made that important contribution.
Yeah. So going back to when you're kind of in high school, let's say, and studying or going into college, studying physics, you mentioned like looking at the folks that you looked up to as musicians and the lifestyle they had. What was sort of the lifestyle that you were looking to have in that field as you started your career and so on and so forth?
Brother, I love you. You fucking millennial. Like, people in my generation didn't plan on a lifestyle.
Yeah.
That's you guys.
Yeah.
I just wanted to not die.
Okay.
I wanted to not be homeless, really. And I think, coming from where I came from in my generation, we had the boomers over us and they were dicks and they were super uptight, but they thought they were really cool because they listened to Joni Mitchell, right? And it was fucking terrible. And I listened to like Gen Z and millennials like complain about boomers and how bad I was. Like they were right in our fucking grill, man, and it sucked.
Yeah.
So I was, people like, oh, you can't buy a house. I'm like, yeah, right. Same for us. It was, the numbers have scaled up, but relative to what an earning was, it was the same or worse. And like, I didn't have a lifestyle plan, dude. I didn't want no whisper quiet G4. That was not what I was thinking about. I just didn't want to fucking be homeless. And I got myself into hot water, like with jazz and then with physics. And it was like, wow. So to make the same amount of money as like an apprentice plumber, I have to be a god at contour integration for quantum field theory.
Yeah.
And it was like,
those are a bunch of words that don't even make sense.
What have I set myself up for here that I have to be like insanely good at a super hard thing that very few people know how to do just to get by?
Yep.
I'm an idiot. What? Why?
Like there are easier paths.
Why didn't I become a carpenter? I'm a moron. Yeah.
Do you remember having that realization?
Oh yeah, everybody had that realization. You get involved in this situation where you are surrounded by the smartest people you've ever met constantly,
Right.
and you're competing with them
Right.
for resources. And then you occasionally, when you leave the physics department or you go out into the world, you hang out with people who aren't in that social group.
Right.
You're reminded like normal people can survive without doing this crazy fucking thing, and it's wild. And but it's an aspect of graduate school and education in general. Sure. You get trapped in a bubble, and everyone has this feeling. It's not unique to physics or math or any of those things, but you do you have this realization like, whoa, like that woman, like, she works in a law firm and she has a nicer car than I'll ever have, and she doesn't know anything about renormalization.
Yeah.
So you have this realization. What do you do about it, if anything, or do you just keep going down your physics path?
Well, nobody likes a quitter, dude. No, you just go harder. It's like
So what did that mean for you in simple terms for a non-physics person like me, like Pat, like many others?
Look, man, I think there's an important distinction that I should draw here, which is that I didn't start doing jazz or physics because I thought it was going to be a good career or because I was looking to achieve some lifestyle, you fucking millennial fucks. I did it because it was beautiful, and I was compelled by the beauty of that pursuit to engage in it. And when it suddenly became super hard and had all the challenges around it, the beauty had not left. Mm-hmm. In fact, the more physics that I studied and understood, the more profound that beauty became, and the kind of majesty of and I know this sounds overblown, but the reason that all physicists say this is because it's fucking true. Like, you start to see underneath what reality is, and you can't stop. It's like seeing the face of God. It literally is, and better, because you can use that knowledge as a predictive tool to build things and to understand how things are going to work.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly addictive. And so it's like a compulsion loop.
Mm-hmm. And not to sound ignorant, but what is it that you or physicists in graduate school, what is it that you're chasing, or what keeps you going? This beauty that you describe, what is it? Like, if you could define it in the simplest of ways, because I'm really curious. I just don't know. What is it that keeps you going? And I see it in other graduate students as well, like in other fields. Like they just keep going and going and going. I'm like, and I don't understand it. I personally don't understand it.
It's like when you're playing a game and you want to get to the end, you want to get to the final boss, you want to build up all the skills you need to get to the final boss. That same feeling.
Right.
It's when you're reading a book and you can't put it down because you have to know it happens.
Right.
It's that same feeling. It's no different.
Right.
It's the same thing.
You feel like there's
no special other thing. It's just it's just that. And video games are a really good analogy for it, because it's like a sense of completion.
Yeah.
It's a sense of getting it done. It's a sense of not quitting, but it's a sense of wonder and discovery. Mm-hmm. It's as Feynman used to say, the pleasure of finding things out. Like, you want to see what happens next.
Right. Is there a final boss though?
Yeah.
Have you experienced the final boss?
No, she's horrible. Nature is like, wow. She's mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. She wants you dead.
Yeah. You just keep going and going and going. And
yeah.
Yeah.
And you think there is, and then you get up in your head, like, is the idea that there is an answer an artifact of the way that human beings think about it? And people, will smoke a joint and ask these questions all the time. It's a totally different thing when you're stone cold sober with a bunch of other people who are motherfuckers, like, who think about this problem all day, having that discussion. Then it's very real, and you have a perspective on it, and you can do experiments to test whether or not you're right. Like, my old advisor is doing an experiment at CERN right now that is setting a limit on the number of dimensions of reality. Jesus. And it's an experiment, and he's actually doing that for real. How can you not be compelled by that?
Right.
And the equipment that's needed to do that, to test this very subtle thing, is awesome. It's this huge stuff, and he uses a ton of power and lots of engineers and vacuum chambers and shit. It's badass. And so it's easy to get caught in it because it's awesome.
Yep.
but you're caught in it nonetheless.
Yeah.
I guess let me ask. Again, like just to play devil's advocate here. Why
the hell does anybody need to play devil's advocate?
'Cause-
who the fuck wants the devil's advocate?
I do love that.
Fire that
I love
attorney.
that. I love that. Yeah, not the attorney. But
this is the problem with devil's advocate. It's fun to be the devil's advocate.
it is. It's very fun.
You're just being a dick to everyone around.
That's fine.
Go ahead, Dick.
But I feel like you do a good job answering these questions, so I think you're okay with it.
Okay.
Why does society need to understand that? Sure, this person, they want to chase this. Awesome. Why is it something that, needs to be understood from a societal level?
Well, so the entire history of the human race is littered with guys like you saying that. And the way it works is that a bunch of people go try to understand the way something works. Right? The sky, the air, water, wind, whatever. And a bunch of dudes like you ask, why? I'm not going to pay my tax dollars for that.
Sure.
Back to ancient Egypt, back to Mesopotamia, right? And then sometimes you're lucky and they do. And you invent the water wheel or you invent the airplane or something.
Sure, yeah.
And then usually the first couple of attempts fail and somebody gets it right. And most of the people who tried it initially are dead or retired and never going to get credit for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the world has it. And then the next generation of guys asking that question are asking it flying in the airplane, not fucking realizing.
Yeah, it was all these like tinkerers.
That the airplane exists because guys like you were defeated.
Yeah.
Right.
And now you assume that that's just how things are. And it's not. Things are the way they are because people sacrifice for real. Their lives, children, literally everything they have to get to move these things against the complaints of people who just don't see the point.
Right.
But it's a luxury to not see the point that's built on the backs of all the people who did see the point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to be a jerk to you, but
no. I understand.
It's a really big deal. And I think it has to do with, ostensibly, the point of your podcast of like building stuff and going through the trouble. When you have a new idea and you want to build a new thing, everybody is going to fight you about it.
Sure.
There are people who don't want change. There are people who want the resources you have.
Yeah.
There are people who are uncomfortable with somebody doing something that they perceive they can't. There are people just insecure about it. There are people who are dicks and just want to see you fail. There are people who want to see the reality TV of you struggling. And so you face all these obstacles. And then when you get done with something like that, your reward is often a bunch of people telling you how lucky you were.
Right.
If you do a really
great timing.
If you do a really good job at it, it will seem easy. Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
we could have done this too. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, it's the classic thing of the kid going to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and looking at, Monet and saying, I could have done that. Right. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't.
Right.
And so, the guy who did went through years and years and years of struggle to do something that he was so good at that it looks easy.
Totally. And I think it's a great point because, and
I don't mean to sound like such a prick.
No. I don't think you do. And, reverting back to just the educational piece or just, whether it's building a business, going through school, I think a lot of times, you're just kind of doing things and you don't really think about or think deeply about the why this is important. And it's important mostly because it's a building block for what's to come. And, when I remember personally, when we got to physics, I don't even think I was prepared. Of course, the teachers were a whole different story and they weren't good at what they did, but the building blocks weren't even there to understand or begin to understand, what physics is or how it could be applicable or just how it resonates in real life. I think that's really the issue with today's society is we don't understand, we don't understand history. Number one, we don't know it. We don't know why it's important. Why things such as the airplane that you mentioned or video games that were created were an amalgamation of all these different things and all these failures from people that you'll never hear about, right? We don't talk about those. We talk about the end result.
It's interesting too because a lot of advances in technology and the understanding of the universe result in an easier life for future generations.
Right.
And future generations of humans often use that easier life to become more ignorant and care less.
Right.
I saw these statistics today about young people, 20% of young people think the Holocaust was untrue, let alone Armenian genocide.
Right,
Jesus.
right.
So,
Yeah.
Which I think 50% of people don't even know about. So,
it could be more. Yeah.
So you have this strange feedback that you try to make the world a better place, and as a result, human beings seem to strive less in some ways. And I think it's such a luxury to not have to worry about history. It's such a luxury to not worry about food. It's such a luxury to not worry about being cold. It's such a luxury to not worry about being in danger.
Yeah.
And when you're in that bubble, as we certainly are in the United States, you look at Ukraine, you look at Gaza or Israel, and it's very abstract, because no matter what happens there, people seem to have the idea that Walmart will still be fully stocked.
Sure.
And, as you gain perspective, you realize Walmart might not always be fully stocked.
Right.
Things could go really south, and you can't just make whatever decision you want to make and expect everything to remain functional.
Totally.
The functionality of the world and this magical distribution system we have and the satellite communications, the internet, and the instant everything was built on the backs of a lot of people sacrificing everything. Often it gets very strong resistance to get it done, and it can be toppled trivially.
Right.
And getting it back is much harder than you think, because it seems automatic now. It seems easy, seems to work easily. It's not easy. It's not easy. The guy who runs our IC design team, Rick Barr, is the inventor of Wi-Fi. And Wi-Fi was a real struggle to get funding for and to do and to figure out how to make radios on chips that would work quickly enough to do it, to standards, you name it. A lot of opposition. A lot of people saying, why would you do that? I have a wire.
Yeah.
Right. And that sounds ludicrous now because you know all of the ways that wireless internet, it goes way beyond just replacing a wire, right?
Totally.
But if you go back to the beginning, people would tell you you're nuts on all those arguments, right? And so,
because they just don't know any better either. They're limited by their reality.
Well, and it would be one thing if the average human being would say, yeah, I just don't know any better. I'm sorry, I don't know either way. But they don't. Instead, you're intimidated about it and you say, you shouldn't do that. That's stupid. I don't see any upside to that. Fuck you. You're not using my money to do that.
Did you get a lot of that?
My entire career is that.
So speaking of your career, let's talk about, Posh mentioned like the application. Once you're out of college, what do you do? What do you decide to like spend your time doing and applying all this knowledge that you've just gained?
Well, I was in graduate school, and two things happened. A huge political storm in the physics community around the team looking for something called the top quark, which was a thing that we needed to find in order to confirm our mastery of something called the standard model, which is the way that we think about the fundamental nature of matter. Okay, big deal. And and we were right about it, and it was actually pretty cool. It's like you have this mathematical model based on observations, and it predicts these crazy things. This thing should exist if you look for it here. But looking for it here turns out you have to build this huge machine to look for it. And it's this crazy thing you never thought would exist. And then you look for it and it's right there. And it gives you incredible confidence about your model. But what it really means is that the human race has this incredible power to predict and understand reality. And that's safety. That's the light staying on. That's Walmart being stocked, right? For future generations in some way. And so you have all these really smart people looking at this, and they all feel that compulsion I was talking about earlier. This need to find out, right? And this understanding of the beauty of that, and it's coupled with a bunch of other stuff too. I mean, at Fermilab, we were creating conditions that hadn't existed since the Big Bang, like right there in this room. And that's amazing. And to be a part of that is an incredible rush. I mean, it's incredible. It's great. It's like being an Olympic athlete. It's ridiculously great. And to get in that room, you have to train really hard your entire life. And you're around all sorts of other people who you're competing with them, and that's horrible. But at the same time, you have, camaraderie. You are in this group, and you're good enough to be in this group. And that's an incredible thrill. Like, it's hard to describe that thrill. And you guys everybody's probably been in a similar situation where you're on a team or something and you made the team and you're a part of the team, and just being on the team is great. And then getting past that and thinking about excelling on the team is a whole other thing. And people outside of that culture can talk about what that's like. Well, why didn't you do this in this game? And they just have no understanding at all of how difficult it really is to exist in there. So you're involved in that, and that's on your mind, and it's super compelling. But you are also competing with one another, right? There are a limited number of jobs, and a limited number of people who get on the big paper, and a very limited number of Nobel Prizes.
Right.
Okay? So the politics can get ferocious, and the politics are never worse than when the stakes are low. Right? You're not competing for billions of dollars here. In fact, in my experience now of meeting people who are competing for billions of dollars, the politics are much lower when there's a ton of money and people getting paid well. When nobody's getting paid anything, it's just about prestige. It's vicious. So there's some of that. There's a big event. There are books about this event in the search for the top quark. And the guy who was my advisor was central in this thing. It was really dispiriting to see. I didn't really want my life to be about that level of politics. And then I was arranging a postdoc for myself at something called the Superconducting Supercollider in Texas. Congress canceled it. And that's when I decided to pull the ripcord. And I went and looked for a job, and I wanted to change because this, all of this conspired where the politics within the group of physicists and then the politics from Washington conspired to really blow my illusion about the beauty of all of this. Right. And so I went to go look for a job, and I ended up in the games industry.
Were you always interested? Well,
the highest purpose of a computer is to play a game.
Yep.
And if you don't agree with that, I'm not your friend. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, so many things are actually games, right? Like if you think about it.
I'm not even going to argue with it. It's just true. So it's
sometimes Microsoft Word feels like a game.
Yeah, no, social media feels like a game. Obviously, cryptocurrency's a game solving puzzles.
The reason that these things feel like a game is because they succeed when they become, when it becomes a game, which is why it's the highest purpose of any computer to play a game.
Do you think there's such thing as the gamification of everything? Like, do you think over time everything will be gamified?
It's automatic.
Yeah.
It's automatic. If you were going to design a crypto wallet, wouldn't you include elements of that compulsion loop of a game in it?
Right.
Would you feel like a moron if you weren't? Yeah, so it's automatic. Mm-hmm. You don't have to think about it anymore. So I've been writing games for computers, always. And so I thought it would be an easy way to, to quickly do something while I was figuring out what else to do. I really wanted to go into airplane design because I started flying airplanes at the time. And so I thought it was a temporary job in the games industry, and it turned out not to be.
So where were you working?
There was a startup called Blue Sky Productions, and they needed somebody to write a physics model for a car because people were starting to do like 2.5D games. And I showed up, and it was all these MIT guys, and they were writing a general 3D engine. And the problem was in games up to that point, like in 2D games, bouncing things off one another and having the dynamics of the game work out was pretty easy, and you could figure it out just working through. But in 3D, it turns out it's not just like twice as hard. It's like 50 times or 100 times harder. And so you actually need to know something about geometry and math and physics for real. And so I got addicted to that problem. I started writing physics engines, and then for a while I was like the only guy writing these physics engines where, you could like throw stuff around walls, the stuff you expect now, but it was like crazy in like the early 90s.
Right.
You could like, bounce a hand grenade around a corner and like hit a guy.
I've never thought about this, how much of physics
that had to be done
in games. Like
So
video games.
I wrote these physics engines, and like the variable names and names for stuff are like in modern physics engines, like in NVIDIA and stuff that you buy or Unreal, it's still the same names as these things I invented in back then. Because it was
now
like
AI you could just tell it to do something. And
you can't actually. It won't do that.
It'll get there.
I don't actually know. The way that large language models work is basically a giant actuarial table. And it's extremely effective with languages, for the most part, just because the bar for human beings understanding language is really low. Like the human brain will interpret lots of different stuff as being sentence structure.
Right.
And you can exploit that. And so, and I don't know if you guys know this or not, but the way that the large language models work, and the breakthrough was finding a way to cause them to not have feedback loops as they search through huge actuarial tables for what the next word should be in a sentence.
Yeah, predictive.
Yeah. And that's what it is. So it's really almost like a parlor trick. It's a magic trick, and it seems like it makes sense. And that's why you see all these, it's so easy to trick the large language models into going crazy or saying dumb shit. Because it really is a parlor trick. It has no idea what it's saying. It's just what the probability of the next word is. And I don't want to take anything away from it. It's an incredible breakthrough, and it's wild technology.
And I'm sure it's only going to improve over time, no?
Well, I don't know. There are a number of papers that have come out showing that more training on these models makes them worse.
Interesting.
And more training on them actually makes them hallucinate more. And so, I think where we're going to get to is that it's a really useful tool for a lot of things. It's not the end-all tool for everything. It has a bunch of limitations. It's random. And a good friend of mine, Grady Booch, is a very famous programmer, said, any organization that plans on using a large language model as part of their business needs to be comfortable with a random number generator inserted in their bottom line, which is true. And some businesses, that's okay.
Seamus, what was the gaming world like when you entered it?
It was not widely understood by the general public that games were written by human beings.
Who do they think wrote
or
it?
that they weren't from Asia. And so when you would tell people that you were a video game designer, they had no idea what you were saying. It was like you were a dog barking at them. And leaving, a prestigious institution and becoming a game designer was not seen as a good move.
And where were you at the
family.
time? Where were you at for grad school?
Fermilab. I was at something called the Universities Research Association, Fermilab, which is like Harvard and Tufts, and it was a big deal. It was a very prestigious thing. I was like in a really lucky place.
So how did you end up at Microsoft after that?
Oh, it was long story.
After that.
A long story. So I made all these games with the MIT guys that were really successful and really influential. And it was lucky that I was there and I had the opportunity to do that. And so, I had this great opportunity, and it's great because I go talk to game devs now, and they have this mistaken impression, that I'm like legendary, revered guy because because we were the first, and so when you're the first at something, you have this advantage that you seem like incredible genius at it. But we were just figuring it out as we went, and we had this idea about emergent gameplay in 3D that if we made 3D worlds and just sort of set them up to work a certain way, it would seem to every player that it was their own world, and every player would have a different story about how they got through it, and it worked out. And that's normal now. But, in 1992, that was fucking weird. Like, nobody had ever thought of that before. And when we tell people that, like, we would go to Electronic Arts and say, we're going to make a game like this, they'd be like, no, you need to work on Madden 92, which I did. I wrote the ball physics code for like Madden 92 or something. I can't remember what. When Madden was still overhead view.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
What is that? I mean, do you have to like sit and like rigorously study football to do that? Or is it just the theories that and laws of physics that apply to
Before you
anything?
made a podcast, did you sit and rigorously study audio engineering?
No.
Okay, so it was the same, basically
You
the
just
same thing.
figured
You
out
just
as
go
you
for
go.
it. Yeah.
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 Interesting.
And you make it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're making games, and then how does that ultimately lead to you?
So I made a game that did really well for the company that earned way more money than I ever earned before, and I wanted to make another one in this series. And a business thing happened that I now understand really well, but at the time was totally new to me, which was that the investors in the company brought in new management because the company was successful, which is, now I'm just like, oh my God, it's the classic venture capital mistake.
Right.
Oh my gosh, now it's made money. I got to get rid of these clowns. And then it crashes because those clowns were the ones who made the money.
Yep.
So, that happened. They brought clowns in, and I wasn't willing to work for the clowns, so I left.
Had you made money at this point?
No.
Personally?
No. Back then, you weren't paid anything for working in games, and I think that this game sold like hundreds of thousands of copies and made tens of millions of dollars for the company. And I don't think we really had a royalty agreement that covered any of those cases. And none of us thought of that because, again, like I keep on saying, we were just so happy to get the opportunity to work on games because it was such a weird thing to have a job working on games.
Yeah.
wasn't like now. There weren't conferences. Like
Right. It was like a new thing. You're like working on something new for the world. People are like experiencing it for the first time. It's exciting to see. It's kind of probably the same reason you were, attracted to like physics. It's like this.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so, and the reason I was attracted to games is because it was like the confluence of the physics stuff and also the creative music stuff at the same time.
Right.
Super compelling. And so we're just happy to do it. So no, there's no money. And I was looking for a job and I got recruited by Dreamworks, which at that time was not yet formed. They were trying to put it together. And
It's Katzenberg?
Spielberg,
Steven and Katzenberg
Geffen.
and Dave Geffen were trying to work a deal out and find their, Saudi money or whatever. And so I went out to LA and
that's when you moved from, you were still in New Mexico?
I was in Boston. I was
Boston.
in Boston. Yeah, I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Harvard Square, all that stuff is cool. I was there for 10 years. I really missed Cambridge. It was cool. I lived next to Cambridge in a town called Somerville. And when I was an undergraduate, I turned left and went to Tufts. And I was a graduate student. I turned right. Anyway, so we came to. I came to LA, talked to Dreamworks and a bunch of other companies, and eventually decided on Dreamworks because it seemed exciting and new. And
What was the job though? Was it video games still?
yeah, it was video games. It was to be a producer of video games, and they're trying to start a video games division of the company. And every time I would come and visit, the corporate office would be different, and they'd be like, "Oh, this is Steven Spielberg. Say hi." And then I came, and Steven Spielberg was like our boss.
Did he know anything about video games?
He's a huge gamer. He knew everything about video games. On his desk, you remember back in the day, you'd have those plastic boxes with floppy disks in them with all your software.
Yep.
This huge at his desk in Amlin, his big fancy movie office. He had a computer with a huge plastic case full of every game you'd ever heard of. Played them all, knew them all.
Wow.
So he was great. And
It's like the Rolodex. I saw someone in our office had like the OG Rolodexes. I thought like I died and like was born back in like 1980.
The thing about the Rolodex, it's a lot like looking through reference books, is that you're looking for somebody in the Rolodex and you'll see all the people around them and it'll remind you of stuff.
Right.
We don't get that now.
No, I love it.
But that's important because you'll think of ideas you never would have thought of them.
Totally.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And and it's fun you sort them through.
Yeah.
And as you're doing it, you're like, oh, I should call Dave.
Right.
Why haven't I called Dave?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
It's
totally.
it's a really cool thing. Anyway, so all right, enough old guy stuff.
The Spielberg,
He's a wonderful
chatting
guy.
with you.
Yeah. And so I started working on a Jurassic Park game there, which became this game Trespasser, which became a huge failure.
So hold on. I always thought that these video game studios, separate from the movie studios, were creating the games and just licensing the IP from these film studios. But DreamWorks was actually internally creating the
Yeah,
games.
it's happened in every possible way, and
Wow.
and it goes back and forth.
Yeah.
There are trends in the video game industry like everything else. Sometimes all the development happens in house at publishers, and then it all becomes third party, and then it's a mix. And sometimes, you have intellectual property coming from film studios being licensed by game companies. Other times you have film studios trying to license their IP to game studios. Sometimes you have video game studios licensing their IP to film and television production houses, like The Last of Us, which is, a big hit now.
Right.
So it goes every way. But back then, none of this was all a pipe dream. So DreamWorks was going to try to make games. And again, these are all firsts.
Yep.
This is before we knew all this stuff now. So I'm there and it's like, okay, what are we going to do? And I wanted to make a game with a true open world, which, as I said before, would have this story experience for the player where they'd feel they did it themselves. So it was a very experimental game called Trespasser, and it came out kind of at exactly the wrong time, the dawn of 3D accelerators. And it was an open world game where we drew the outside using procedural animation. It was brilliant, but incompatible with 3D accelerators. So all of the hardcore guys who would normally buy our games and be super excited had bought these accelerators, and our game ran worse on it. And there were a bunch of problems.
This
and
is the 90s?
This is the 90s. And this is the NV1 first accelerators. And I was really, I was a young manager and I just exited this, Cambridge, and the group of people who I had around to support me to make sure the game shipped and all this kind of stuff. And I was creating a new game studio. It was in Hollywood. I never lived here before, and there was all this Hollywood shit going on. I'd fucked up everything and did some stuff right. And I mean, I guess now this game is kind of a cult game, but at the time it was a disaster. I got fired. But
From Dreamworks.
Yeah. But I had met Bill Gates, or not really fired, but I just, I was shown the door and I went through it.
Mutually, or a mutual decision.
Hey, Seamus, that's the door, and I would love to see you just walk through it and never come back.
It'd be great, baby. It was you outside that door.
Right.
But I was like, 28 or 29. And so,
don't give away
when you're that age, you're like,
no numbers, because now it's
making it easy on the audience.
It's okay. When I say them, it's fine.
Got you. Okay, I can't say them.
I want you to make sure that you understand.
Understood.
Okay.
Understood.
So, I went to Bill Gates, who I had met as he was an investor in Dreamworks or Dreamworks Interactive, one of the two.
And he was interested in video games too?
He had come for a tour.
Okay.
And I had shown him our big open world physics engine, and it had real time Foley running from the physics system, all this stuff. Again, this stuff is all normal now, but like it was the only place on earth that had ever run before, like when we were showing him.
And Bill Gates wasn't Bill Gates as he is today, was he?
In the 90s?
Well, he was a different Bill Gates. I mean, he was very famous, but the culture had not yet shifted to where when you became that famous, there were like all sorts of people attacking you for weird shit you may or may not have done.
Well, social media wasn't around, so
yeah, and so and Trespasser actually came out right at the dawn of online games journalism, and so I got the first trolls and the first death threats, and like had to like call the cops and stuff. It was really tough. Anyway, so Bill had come, saw it. He said, "You should work at Microsoft," and I liked him a lot, and I knew who he was, because he'd been a Harvard guy, and he hired a bunch of physics guys, and so we knew him. And so I sent him an email. It's like, okay, well, I need a job, and so he forwarded it to somebody, and I got an interview at Microsoft. And I ended up being the program manager of entertainment graphics for Windows.
Okay.
So I went up to my little nondescript office, with no window at Microsoft, and was a program manager, which I had no idea what it was. And I felt like a huge failure in life. And I remember I showed up in Seattle on the first day of like 100 straight days of rain in the winter with my dog. And I rented a car, and the electric window broke in the car. So the rain is coming in the window, and my dog's unhappy, and I was crying, and I was just like, my life's over. I'm never going to make a game again. It's all over.
But was this like level of like, maybe like prestige of working at Microsoft at the time that made you feel a little bit better, or no?
No, again, I was just trying to survive. I just didn't want to be homeless.
It wasn't a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Microsoft lifestyle.
This was like, imagine how you used to think before Instagram, man. Like, you gotta get your head around that.
Yeah. I'm trying to rewind
it's not going to last forever.
Microsoft was still a big deal though in that time.
Yeah, it would have been seen as extremely weird to take a picture of your legs back then.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and Microsoft was beloved at that time, like in Seattle. It was like this amazing success story. And it was just turning. And so I, thought I was going to just toil away at obscurity forever and figure out what to do with my life, because games was over for me because I had failed. It was sad. It's weird.
So between that and when you start getting back into games, are you just you're going through the motions, you're just like working at this job, and then what happens?
Well, so I had, as the program manager of entertainment graphics for Windows, I had access to all of the new video cards and all the new video technology coming out for the PC. And, these same companies that I've been, kind of unintentionally burned by so hard on Trespasser were learning from the first generation of video cards for the PC were terrible. For 3D video cards, they were learning from their mistakes, and it was getting better. And in the intermediate time, PlayStation 1 had been released. And if you remember PlayStation 1 from your distant childhood, remember that everything was like weird and warpy on it, all 3D, right? That's because it had linear texture mapping, so everything was looked incorrect. So they had to do all sorts of tricks to make sure that the fact that the texture maps warped wasn't too offensive, because it was like this wild, acid trip world, right? So Sony announced PlayStation 2 while I was at Microsoft that they'd begun developing it. and they had an ad that it was so powerful it could run Excel, and it could replace the PC, and they were going to let it run Linux. And I looked at that and I thought, I'm still in my depressed state. Like I'm an idiot. I've been proven to be a jackass kind of thing. I had this huge, opportunity with Steven Spielberg and I blew it. And I look at it and I'm thinking, okay, like, fuck you, Sony. Like all of the games for PlayStation are developed on the PC. And then there are tools that then cram it into the PlayStation to run. So all the tools are all running on PCs. And these graphics cards that are coming out are going to blow away the PlayStation 2 graphics performance you're talking about, because you've got a bunch of Japanese engineers who are like pushing a very Japanese philosophy, a very sort of like video game philosophy of graphics, whereas the card manufacturers for the PC are following sort of the academic path of computer graphics, like RenderMan from Pixar, advanced lighting models. That's really beautiful. And so we're going to destroy you. The problem is, even though all of the tools are on the PC and all of the graphics tools are on the PC, and probably the tools they were using to design the chips in the PlayStation 2 were on the PC. And all of the graphics chips that are going to come up for the PC are going to be superior to what you're proposing. Every PC is different. Everybody builds their own PC or buys them from Dell, and all have a different configuration. And so no piece of software can be as finely tuned to exploit every single ounce of performance and to be consistently great as you can on a console, because every console is identical. So the great advantage of PlayStation 1 was that everyone could overcome those horrible texture mapping problems, and every gamer would experience the same way. Whereas on the PC, and I'd been shipping PC games, you had to spend a huge amount of time on compatibility, and your game had to be tuned for the least common denominator system. So you could never make your game super awesome because it had to run on the average dude's system, or they get really pissed off. There's a big complaint on Trespasser actually, was that the requirements are too high.
Yeah.
And so I got to thinking, like, we could cream Sony and fuck them on this Excel thing, with my Microsoft hat on now. So
video games hadn't been really discussed. Like it wasn't something that Microsoft was thinking about or focused on at all.
It's so odd to have this conversation because yeah, absolutely. Like the idea of Microsoft doing video games would be like having a conversation right now about Facebook doing like gynecological products.
Right.
It's completely bizarre. Like, what?
Yeah.
It truly was.
Yeah.
The fact that it makes sense to you now and that seems odd to you makes me very proud in a way. Yeah, it was crazy. So this thinking took a minute. I was like, all right, well, if we made a platform that was consistent so that every game could take advantage of the full power of these new chips, we could cream them. And so I wrote a proposal, said that, and I knew Bill Gates, so I could send it to Bill. Because I also knew that there were, because I get all this information about what was going on at Microsoft. There are people who are thinking of making a tablet, not like an iPad. They were not thinking of this like iPad. It was just like this touchscreen tablet that would sit on your refrigerator, and it would tell you when you need to go to the store to get stuff.
Yeah, which is like a modern day smart fridge now. Yeah.
Do they have that?
Yeah.
But you're thinking of a modern day smart fridge. This wasn't as clever as that.
Yeah.
This was the dumb version. And so I started to invite myself to meetings and be like, we shouldn't do this dumb thing. If we're going to make a device, we could make a PC optimized for DirectX.
So this is Microsoft
technology.
just like trying to think of like moonshot kind of ideas that are somewhat related.
You're thinking this is organized in some way. No, this is one guy thinking that this is something Microsoft should do and inviting himself to meetings and telling people shit they don't want to hear. You asked before, why would we do this? Every single motherfucker there, especially like the mid-level management guys who had a nice life. Why would I change this life? They didn't want to hear about a new device.
Yep.
Right.
They wanted to make their numbers making mice. They wanted to make their numbers, selling webcams.
Right.
They didn't want to hear that we needed to make a new device. So I was unwelcome.
Right.
But I had religion on this because as I thought about it and as I told my friends about it, I told my friend Kevin first. As soon as I wrote the proposal on a plane, and I told my friend Kevin about it. We could make a box that just runs DirectX, which is where Xbox comes from. And I got religion, and I didn't have any career there. I'd been there like 3 months, so I had nothing to lose. And all these guys were like, they'd come and go. Kevin came and go. He's a good friend, but and other guys who helped us out. When it looked like it might damage their career, or it was uncool, they would like vanish.
Yep.
So I had a lot of like flying into battle and being like,
Right.
"Where's my wingman?" But I was okay. That's how new ideas are. And at the end, they stuck with me, and
So-
but nobody wanted to hear this, and it wasn't like an initiative of Microsoft. This was a hijacking, and the fact that I knew Bill Gates was the card I had.
But explain this to me, and let's go a little deeper on this, because I'm sure there's a lot of folks that are listening that may not have been, that are not in the gaming world, but they're in other industries and they're at companies where they believe there's an idea that they have and they want to disrupt and they want to, bring the new ideas and new initiatives and new whatever it may be, new technologies. Talk to us a little bit deeper about your persistency, about being told no, about answering the why when you knew the why was, what do you mean? Of course we have to do this. Like, this is a no-brainer in my head. How do you persuade them, right? It's one thing to know, and it's one thing to persuade the other party who is a decision maker, right? Who is the money, who's going to actually bring the project to life, perhaps, to do this.
Well, the first thing is to not fool yourself. And it's another interesting Feynman quote. Feynman said, "Don't fool yourself. You're the easiest one to fool." You got to make sure that the idea you have is actually good.
Right.
And I was lucky because I had just come from, computer games, from PC games. And even though I hadn't made money, I had made the company a fuck ton of money on a bunch of games. And all my friends who were developers had also, the industry started to make just a lot of money, like meaningful money on a Microsoft scale. So it was a good business.
Right.
So, and I knew that intuitively, right? I also knew about 3D rendering intuitively because I had been one of the first people to write 3D rendering and physics packages for those games. So I knew exactly what Sony was doing, and I knew all about the hardware because I'd gone through this traumatic experience with Trespasser and how the hardware worked in writing drivers. And I had written drivers, so I knew about how it all worked. And I knew how much money PlayStation was making. So I knew this was a good bet. Okay, that's the first key. Make sure the idea you're pitching isn't some whack job thing that's a personal project of yours or some kind of therapy for you to feel better about yourself. Because it's easy to think of the story of me after Trespasser doing Xbox as being like a redemption thing or the therapy thing I needed to make my life right. And I wasn't thinking about it that way at the time. I got overtaken. All of my other, and this was great for me emotionally, but all of my worries and concerns and stuff got obliterated once I realized that there was this opportunity. Here's this huge market. And Sony, which we now think of inseparably from PlayStation, PlayStation was still a small division in Sony. Sony was a TV and radio company and music company. And this insurgency had come out of Sony Music and created this video game console. When everyone inside Sony told those guys, the Seamus of Sony got told, Nintendo owns this market. You're an idiot. You're going to lose all our money. And there are books about this. It's weirdly analogous. And they persevered and created this business, and it started to grow. And I was watching, and you could see that it was growing faster than the rest of Sony's business. And the reports were starting to come out. And so we knew that it was good. Also, Microsoft is a company that can scale to compete with somebody like Sony.
Right.
Also, you could, so that's important. Okay.
And did you actually have these methodical thoughts in your head, or is this just you answering the question by looking back at what actually happened?
I actually had those thoughts in my head. That this is part of the great.
It was a strategic.
No, this is
thing.
It was physics. I was thinking about the problem like a physicist, and this is part of the reason that I encourage people to study physics. It can apply to everything. The part of the reason that I decided to study physics was because you don't have to memorize anything. You can derive everything from first principles from scratch, more or less. I'm terrible at memorization.
No.
And so what you're really learning with physics is a way to think that's hugely effective.
Right.
Because you're trying to investigate things that are really subtle and humans are bad at thinking about it. And so you get a toolkit that lets you overcome it. Like humans are emotional. You want to believe this thing is going to be true, but nature doesn't care. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that bias? Well, you have a
methodology.
You have a methodology for thinking. You have a tool set for thinking that helps you to overcome that human bias, right? And that methodology, the thought process, is what I was using for Xbox.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's how I was thinking about it. And then the thing I had to develop was how do you then sell that to an organization?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay, so you have to understand your organization. Microsoft at that time was a company whose goal was still to put a PC on every desk in the world. You get an award, the Ship It Award, everybody have in their office with a different sticker for every project you worked on. And it said, the dream of a computer on every desk in the world, which seems silly now,
Mm-hmm.
but it was not silly then. It was not the case then. That it was still not happened. It had not happened yet. So it was a software company with a grandiose mission. And I understood that if you could make a case that this was a great business and it was a software business compatible with Microsoft's other business, that you could probably sell it in. And the other thing was that the old school guys at Microsoft, the founders of Microsoft, who had built it from a garage into, at that time, the most profitable company in the history of the human race. I sat at product reviews next to this guy, John Devon, a wonderful guy who was running Office at the time. And I had started a project that was going to lose $5 billion. And John Devon, sitting next to me at the product review, was running literally the most profitable business in the history of the human race. I was thinking at the time,
The
like, wow.
contrast, yeah.
Yeah, I'm an asshole. Yeah. So, so you have to understand your audience.
Yeah.
And so we went to the old school guys, because I knew Bill and the founders, Rick Rashid and the older guys who were above the middle management layer. There's a huge layer of middle management at the time at Microsoft who were multimillionaires because they just worked there a while.
And Xbox would have died
and they were
at that level.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. They would have killed it because of the thing you said. Why would we do this?
Why change?
Right.
Yeah,
so
they're comfortable.
But Bill and these guys were like, fuck yeah, let's jam it. Let's go. Let's go. Let's kill him. Let's go. Right. And that's how I was.
Is that how he was? Is that how he is?
He loves a challenge. He's very competitive. And if he wants to do something, he wants to do it better than anybody else, faster than anybody else. And he believes that consumers will buy something because it's the best in the world if you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great. It's great. He's also a really sweet guy. He's a huge nerd. People who know Bill well are always completely flabbergasted by all the shit people say about Bill because it's, not who he is. And anyway, it's like the guy puts forward a plan to literally give away all of his wealth to needy causes and tries to solve the world's biggest causes and just takes nothing but shit about it. It's hilarious. Like, okay, what the hell else do you? Should he be sawing body parts off? Like, what do you do?
Yeah.
In any case, so he took a bet on me.
He said, so you guys sit down, you meet. Is that what it?
No, it took a long time. He was very skeptical, wanted to know more. He wanted to prove it. We made prototypes. We went through a long process. Other groups at Microsoft came forward and said, we should make a game console because we know better. And it was very frustrating. It was a frustrating couple of years, but we eventually got it done. And the team grew in an awkward way, and I learned about politics, and I learned about all sorts of things. And it was a great education. But at the end of the day, Bill and to some extent Ballmer and these other guys, they really appreciated the entrepreneurial spirit, and they wanted it back again. Microsoft had lost that in some ways. They wanted it back, and then and Xbox became hugely popular within Microsoft. So I found myself, emceeing the company meeting, like 40,000 people at a stadium.
It was basically its own company within the company.
Yeah, and it was a brand people would be proud of. And this is when Microsoft was facing antitrust, and Google and Microsoft suddenly has switched to being evil.
Right.
And it was a thing people could be proud of. So the timing was great.
Did you enjoy what you were doing?
I loved it.
Every day it was a new challenge.
Every other day I'd drive home crying and thinking I wanted to drive into the ocean.
Because of the rain?
No, because of politics, because of people doubting your idea, people doubting you, ad hominem attacks. Like, who is this new guy this guy's a failure. Look at his game, all that stuff.
Yeah.
At what point
every
did they start coming around and being like, wow, this guy actually knows what he's talking about?
They never do.
Really?
They never do. What happens is years later, you hear them on some other podcast saying, yeah, he had it right.
Oh yeah, I know Seamus. I was there.
Yeah,
that guy's a genius.
That's right, and that's what happens. So I have this experience of like people who actively tried to stand in the way of it and tried to shoot me down again and again and again. I'll hear about them. I'll see them interviewed somewhere, and they'll say, "Yeah, it was great. It was such a great team. We were all together." And I'm like, "Wow, okay,
yeah,
right, cool,
Good way to rewrite history. I wish you guys wrote as good of a game as you did the history.
It's all right. I mean, the thing is that the older I get, the more I realize, and that's quite old, as you will point
You don't have
out.
to give me numbers. It's okay.
Just honesty and compassion and just love of your fellow man is the most important thing in the world. And the amount of trouble that could have been saved if people had just got over their shit, as I look back, is incredible. So I think setting an example of not being that way is super important.
I know there's probably a millennial question too, but or mindset, but
Okay, he looks millennial. You're not looking so millennial
Thank
anymore,
you.
but okay.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
same age. He's older than me.
2
By
weeks.
2 weeks.
He's aging well. All right, so
Yeah, I know. Yeah, good skincare. I hope at that point that you had financial success because you had created this. Obviously, after many years, Xbox was and is obviously a huge success. Were you at all? I mean, was there this moment of realization of like, finally, like I know you were in survival mode, you just didn't want to die, but did it ever exceed that?
well, there's a when you're driven by projects and goals, and it becomes like it feels like trench warfare. I mean, you're in this fight for your life,
Right.
and it's about your idea, and it's about succeeding at the thing that you want to see happen in the world and changing something in the world. And so realizing that I could buy a Ferrari didn't even occur to me. The things that really mattered, like when I showed up with Kevin at the Tokyo Game Show, at the subway station where the show was happening, Odaiba. And we walked off the subway. We were hungover, and I had to give a talk or a speech or something, and maybe in front of the whole conference. I can't remember. And got out of the subway, and somebody had plastered the whole station in Xbox logos. And it was so emotional. I fell on my knees, because it was like, it was real. And it was the logo was a thing my friend Horace drew in green because he didn't have any other color marker left. And here it was, like in Japan. And that meant more to me than money by a lot.
Yeah.
And so it's never really been my mindset. I'm sure I could be a lot wealthier if I cared about it. I just don't really care about it.
Yeah.
So with the launch of Xbox, I can't remember, but was there like a game that was unique to Xbox that came out with it? Was it Halo, or that came later?
Yes, it was Halo.
It was Halo.
Yes, son, it was Halo.
So you created that simultaneously.
No, that was Bungie. So Bungie was a company that was in Chicago. It was bought by Microsoft when Microsoft wanted to show more diversity in their games group. So they had a games publisher, which was like the redheaded stepchild of like software at Microsoft. It was a separate campus. They mainly were trying to do kids games and like games for education. And a guy took it over who really wanted to build it into a big publisher like Electronic Arts. And so one of the things he did was buy Bungie, who were famous on Macintosh. We're doing 3-dimensional games on Macintosh and multiplayer games on Macintosh. Marathon is if you could look that up, they're really big step forward in multiplayer games, online multiplayer games. It was a Macintosh game, and he moved them to Redmond and gave them a special office and all sorts of like special perks in order to create a publishing business for Macintosh also. Because again, at the time with all the antitrust and everything, the idea of Microsoft doing things that weren't just on Windows was really attractive. Okay. So they come over and they have this idea for what becomes Halo. That's going to be a big Macintosh game. And along comes this redheaded asshole with his fucking video game console idea.
Yeah.
And next thing they know, they have to put it on this video game console.
Interesting. So that happens. How long are you on the Xbox team, and what ultimately happens where you leave?
Well, so I ended up, if you look back through media, I ended up kind of unintentionally fronting Microsoft for a while, right? And it was really stressful, and the politics were tough, and Xbox launched and it was successful. But the games that came out were the same games as on other platforms or worse. And I had learned a lot about business, and I had really started to think about the problems of, and I got my confidence back, and I started to think, okay, well, I understand about business now to some extent. And I see why it was hard for me to get some game ideas funded. I see why Trespasser failed. And I saw that, and it was great because I suddenly saw Trespasser not just as my failure, but as the failure of the company at Dreamworks to get their shit together and support somebody making something that could have been a pivotal game, like a really important game. And it helped me a lot. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that probably what I needed to do next was to start a game publisher. And so I got obsessed with that idea. And so I co-founded a finance company with Kevin Backus and another guy who we had met. And we went to raise money to just start financing games. And I wanted to build a publisher because I now knew that I could manage thousands of people and I could deal with big P&L at an international level. And I knew all the publishers, and I knew, how the sausage was made, and that it wasn't some magical shit.
Did you enjoy that aspect of it, the operational aspect of it?
Yeah, I love doing that. I loved having a lot of employees, and I loved, helping the team to succeed in that way. And I found that I could. It's painful, but I found that I was able to do it. And
what kind of a leader are you?
I am I think of myself as being a kind of benevolent dictator type guy. But one of my board members is Ed Catmull. He's a really nice guy, and he told me that I remind him so much of Steve Jobs, which I think of as being really negative. So maybe I'm more of an asshole than I thought. So that's what yeah.
Okay.
You have to build an organization that takes care of everybody. And in the business that I'm in, which is very secret, but it's true in games also, you create an engine that conjures value out of the vacuum. Right? It's guys sitting in seats, people working and thinking of ideas. And if all these men and women are happy and feel safe and secure, then they will conjure a huge amount of value from nothing. But if there's politics and they feel insecure, then they're not going to be creative, and you're not going to create as much value. It's inefficient. Right. It's bad business. Okay. Right. So good business in creative spaces like this is to keep everybody feeling good and safe. Right. So you have to build a culture that does that. But to do that, there has to be a knife that cuts away the things that aren't working. And as the CEO, you are that knife. And so you have to have a very hard edge, and everybody has to understand where that is.
Got it.
And so you have to, and if I'm a really sensitive person, and I really try to lead with kindness, and you have to get your head around the fact that sometimes often kindness requires you to be super hard like that, and for you to be an asshole.
Right.
You have to be the asshole on behalf of the team.
But it also, I feel like, takes a mutual understanding from that team that there's a reason why you are
it's coming
the
from
way you are.
Good place.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if they think you're genuine, just like a dickhead, I think that's a different story than we know why he is this way. He is trying to achieve a goal for the company to make our lives easier, better, And
that's a big advantage that I have over, people who are up and coming, is that I have a very public history of all of these things. And so when I get salty and when I yell at people and when I move things around, it's really easy for everybody to feel like, okay, he must know what he's doing.
Yeah.
But, if you're a new manager coming up, it's harder.
How often do you actually know what you're doing?
Never. Does anybody?
Yeah. No.
No,
that was the answer I was
like,
expecting.
Here's the thing. You know what you're doing when you don't even have to think.
Right.
When you have to consider what you're doing and try to figure it out, that's when you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
And it's okay to not know what you're doing. It's fine. It's exciting even. And the key characteristic that I believe differentiates effective great leaders from not effective and great leaders is understanding that your value as a manager is your track record and ability to deal with not knowing what you're doing and succeed. Bad leaders freak out. I don't know what I'm doing, and it crashes. Good leaders, I don't know what I'm doing. Let's get the right people here. Let's figure this out. Let's make good decisions. And if they're not right, let's correct quickly. Mm-hmm. And let's succeed in the unknown.
Right.
That is the job.
Right.
So talk to us a little bit about what you're up to today. What are you working on?
Well, I am building an old kingdom bakery on the Giza Plateau in Egypt. I am developing methodologies for hydroponic production of cacao trees.
Okay.
To try to
where did these ideas come from?
These are just hobbies. They grew from hobbies.
Okay.
And I run a company in deep stealth mode in Pasadena.
Okay, cool. So you just you have the company, but you have all these other interests you're pursuing in the meantime.
And a lot of them come out of the company. The company is, it's a company that survives, like a lot of the other things we've talked about through all this, on the creation of value from nothing. And so, the job is to keep everybody intellectually and creatively nourished and moving forward. And so we do a lot of side projects, and out of these side projects grow these weird things.
That's awesome.
You talked about moving from Venice to Pasadena. Why did you make that move?
Why did I make that move? Because I wanted to buy a house. And at that time, the house prices in Pasadena were half of Venice.
It's like now flipped, no?
That was it, yeah.
Pasadena's a great place.
Oh, it's awesome.
Seamus, this has been so much fun. I wish we could talk for hours because I feel like there's so much to unpack and, talk to you about. But we can't thank you enough for, coming on the show and just sharing not only your story, but all this wisdom and all this, these like crazy, awesome things you've accumulated and acquired along the way. And, can't wait to see what comes next with the business out of stealth mode eventually, hopefully, so we can know what you're working on.
Either it'll crash and you'll never hear of it again.
Yeah.
Or it'll be a big deal. We'll see.
It's been a pleasure.
And for me as well. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.